The thunder of hooves across the dusty plain masked the sound of Hannah Abbott's racing heart as she urged her mare faster toward Cottonwood Springs. The year was 1876, and this corner of Arizona territory had grown even more lawless since the railroad surveyors had come through last spring. Behind her, the setting sun painted the vast landscape in hues of amber and gold, but Hannah had no time to admire the scenery. She was already late returning to town, and nightfall in these parts was no time for a woman to be alone. Hannah adjusted her worn leather satchel, feeling the reassuring weight of her father's Colt revolver nestled inside. At 22, she had learned that a woman traveling alone needed both wits and protection. 3 years of running her late father's general store had taught her to be self-reliant, though the loneliness of her existence sometimes pressed upon her like a physical weight. As she crested the hill overlooking the narrow valley where Cottonwood Springs lay, she slowed her horse, relief washing over her. The small settlement's scattered buildings came into view, lamplight already glowing in windows as dusk approached. She'd made it before dark after all. Hannah was halfway down the slope when she heard it raised voices, then a sickening crack followed by a pained cry. She reined in her mare, straining to see through the growing shadows. At the edge of town, near the livery stable, 3 men stood around a fourth who was now slumped on his knees in the dirt. Filthy half-breed, one of the standing men spat, his voice carrying on the evening air. Thought you could steal from decent folk. Another vicious blow landed, and Hannah flinched. She didn't know the man on the ground, but she recognized his attackers, the Dutton brothers, notorious troublemakers who drifted into town about a month ago. They'd been a menace ever since, throwing their weight around and intimidating the more peaceable citizens. The sensible thing would be to ride wide around this situation, to make her way home without getting involved. Sheriff Parker was useless, spending most of his time drunk in the back room of his office, but even his deputy might be able to break up this fight before the stranger was killed. But Hannah knew no help would come in time. She slapped her reins against her mare's neck, urging the horse forward before reason could overtake her courage. She approached at a gallop, dust billowing behind her. When she was 20 feet away, she pulled her father's revolver from her satchel. "That's enough." She shouted, pointing the weapon at the tallest of the 3 men. Her voice was steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. The men turned, surprised by the interruption. The stranger on the ground remained motionless. "Well, well," the eldest Dutton Rance drawled. "If it ain't the shopkeeper's daughter playing at being a man." His eyes were cold and calculating as they fixed on Hannah's weapon. "This ain't your business, girl." Hannah's mare shifted nervously beneath her, but she kept the gun trained on Rance's chest. 3 against 1 isn't fair odds," she said. "Let him be." "This half-Cherokee thief was caught stealing supplies," the youngest Dutton snarled. "Justice is justice." Hannah glanced quickly at the man on the ground. His face was bloodied, but she could make out high cheekbones and copper skin that indeed suggested native heritage. He was dressed like any other cowhand-worn denim, dusty boots, a bandana now soaked with blood from a cut above his eye. "If he stole something, take him to the sheriff," Hannah countered. "Beating a man half to death isn't justice." Rance took a step toward her and Hannah cocked the revolver. The unmistakable click made him pause. "My father taught me to shoot before I could ride," she said evenly. "I won't miss at this distance." A tense silence fell over the scene. The middle Dutton brother fidgeted with the knife at his belt, clearly weighing his options. Finally, Rance spat in the dust. "You're making a mistake, girl," he said. "This ain't over." "For tonight it is," Hannah replied, not lowering the gun. "Now back away." To her surprise, they complied. With a few final muttered threats, the 3 men retreated toward the saloon at the far end of the main street. Hannah remained atop her horse until they disappeared inside, then quickly dismounted and hurried to the injured man. Up close, he was in worse shape than she'd thought. Blood matted his dark hair and one eye was swollen shut. But as she knelt beside him, his good eye opened a startling blue that contrasted sharply with his bronzed skin. "Can you stand?" she asked, glancing anxiously toward the saloon. The Duttons would likely return with reinforcements. The man grimaced, trying to push himself upright. I think so, he managed, his voice a deep rasp. Why did you help me? Hannah looped his arm around her shoulder, struggling to help him to his feet. He was tall and solidly built, making the task difficult. Let's get you somewhere safe first, she said. Questions later. Together they staggered to her horse. With considerable effort, Hannah helped him mount, then climbed up behind him. She could feel him swaying, barely conscious, as she urged the mare toward her home behind the general store. Night had fully fallen by the time they reached the small clapboard house. Hannah helped the stranger inside, easing him onto a chair in her kitchen while she lit the lamps and stoked the dying embers in the cookstove. My name is Hannah, she said as she filled a basin with water. Hannah Abbotts. The man pressed a hand to his ribs, wincing. Wade, he replied after a moment. Wade Blackburn. Hannah brought the basin to the table along with a clean cloth. You're not from around here. Just passing through, Wade confirmed, watching warily as she dipped the cloth in water. Headed for California. Hannah began to gently clean the blood from his face. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. Despite his battered state, there was a quiet dignity in the way he held himself. Were you really stealing? She asked bluntly. Wade's good eye flashed with indignation. No, I paid for my supplies fair and square. The storekeeper can confirm it, but those men. He trailed off, then shrugged. Some folks don't need much reason to hate, Hannah nodded. She'd seen enough prejudice since her father died to know Wade spoke the truth. Cottonwood Springs had changed in recent years, becoming less welcoming as drought and hard times brought out the worst in people. You took a risk, Wade said quietly as she pressed a cold cloth to his swollen eye. Those men won't forget. They would have killed you, Hannah replied simply. Maybe, but why would you care? I'm just a stranger. Hannah paused, cloth in hand. Why had she intervened? It had been foolish, dangerous even. The Duttons could have easily turned on her. Yet seeing the savage beating, the unfairness of it all, had ignited something within her, a sense of justice that her father had instilled in her from childhood. Because it wasn't right, she finally said. And there aren't many people left in this town willing to stand up for what's right. Wade studied her with his uninjured eye, something like respect flickering across his face. Well, I'm grateful, Miss Abbotts. Not many would have done what you did. They lapsed into silence as Hannah continued tending his wounds. She discovered 2 cracked ribs, which she bound carefully, and numerous bruises that would be painful but would heal with time. Throughout her ministrations, Wade remained stoically quiet, flinching only when she probed his most serious injuries. You should rest here tonight, Hannah said when she'd finished. I have a spare room. Wade shook his head. I've imposed enough, and I don't want to bring trouble to your door. The trouble's already here, Hannah countered. The Duttons know I interfered. Better to face whatever comes together than alone. A ghost of a smile crossed Wade's split lip. You're not what I expected to find in Cottonwood Springs. And what did you expect? Not someone brave enough to face down 3 armed men for a stranger. Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks and turned away to hide her reaction. You need food and rest. I'll make some supper. As she busied herself at the stove, she was acutely aware of Wade's presence behind her. It had been months since she'd had anyone in her home. After her father's death, the stream of suitors hoping to gain control of the general store had eventually dried up when they realized Hannah intended to run the business herself. Loneliness had become her constant companion, though she rarely admitted it even to herself. You live here alone. Wade asked, breaking into her thoughts. Since my father died 3 years ago, Hannah confirmed, slicing bread to go with the stew she was reheating. He built this place when I was a child. The general store was his dream. And now it's yours, Hannah glanced over her shoulder. Wade was watching her with that intense blue gaze, a curious expression on his battered face. It's what I have, she replied carefully. Whether it was my dream or not doesn't much matter anymore. Dreams matter, Wade said quietly. Without them, we're just surviving, not living. The simple words struck Hannah with unexpected force. Had she been merely surviving these past years? Running the store, keeping accounts, ordering inventory, it was a life. But was it living? She served the stew in silence, her mind turning over Wade's observation. They ate without much conversation, the events of the evening hanging heavy between them. Afterward, Hannah showed Wade to the small spare room that had once been her father's. "I'll be up at dawn to open the store," she told him. "Rest as long as you need." Wade nodded his thanks, then caught her hand as she turned to leave. His palm was rough with calluses but warm against her skin. "What you did today," he said, his voice low and serious. "That's how I knew you'd save me too." Hannah's brow furrowed. "What do you mean I did save you?" A strange expression crossed Wade's face. "From the Duttons, yes, but that's not all I need saving from." Before she could question him further, he released her hand. "Good night, Miss Abbotts, and thank you again." Hannah retreated to her own room, Wade's cryptic words echoing in her mind. As she prepared for bed, she found herself wondering about her mysterious guest. Who was he really? What had brought him to Cottonwood Springs? And what did he mean about needing more saving? Sleep was elusive that night. Hannah dozed fitfully, waking at every creak of the house settling and each whisper of wind against the window pane. Just before dawn, she gave up trying to rest and dressed for the day. To her surprise, Wade was already awake, sitting at her kitchen table drinking coffee he'd apparently brewed himself. In the soft morning light, his injuries looked even more severe, the bruising around his eye having darkened to a deep purple. "You should still be resting," Hannah chided, though she was secretly impressed he was up and moving. "I've had worse," Wade replied, rising stiffly to his feet. "I thought I'd help open the store. It's the least I can do." Hannah shook her head. "You're in no condition to work. Besides, showing your face might just provoke the Duttons again." "I can't hide forever," Wade said, "and I don't run from trouble." Something in his tone made Hannah look at him more closely. There was steel beneath his quiet demeanor, a resolve that matched her own stubborn streak. She found herself respecting his determination, even as she worried about the consequences of him being seen. "Fine," she conceded, "but stay behind the counter. Let's not draw unnecessary attention." They walked together to the store, the early morning stillness broken only by the distant crow of a rooster. Hannah unlocked the front door, the familiar smell of coffee, leather, and dry goods greeting her as she entered. This had been her world since her father's death: orderly shelves, meticulous ledgers, and a steady stream of customers who respected her father's memory, if not always her authority, as a businesswoman. As she moved about lighting lamps and preparing for the day, Wade leaned against the counter, watching her with undisguised interest. "You run this place entirely alone?" he asked. Hannah nodded. "I hire a local boy to help with heavy deliveries, but otherwise, yes." Impressive. The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "It's not easy," she admitted. "Some folks don't like doing business with a woman, but I know this store better than anyone, and I'm fair with my prices." "Your father would be proud," Wade said quietly. Before Hannah could respond, the bell above the door jangled. She turned, expecting her first customer of the day, but instead found herself face to face with Deputy Marshal Fletcher. The lawman's gaze immediately went to Wade, his expression hardening. "Miss Abbotts," he said, tipping his hat without taking his eyes off Wade. "I heard there was trouble yesterday evening." "Nothing that required the law's attention," Hannah replied evenly. "Just a misunderstanding." Fletcher's mouth twisted skeptically. "3 men say different. They claim this fellow," he jerked his chin toward Wade, "stole supplies and then attacked them when confronted." Wade straightened, wincing slightly at the movement. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Fletcher challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who's been in a fight." "A fight where he was outnumbered 3-1, Hannah cut in. "I witnessed it, Deputy. Mr. Blackburn was being beaten senseless when I intervened." "Mr. Blackburn, is it?" Fletcher turned his attention back to Wade. "Got any papers to prove who you are?" "Lost them crossing the Pecos," Wade replied smoothly. "But I've got money to pay for what I need, and I'm just passing through. No trouble intended." Fletcher studied him for a long moment. "The Duttons want to press charges, theft and assault." "That's ridiculous," Hannah protested. "If anyone should be charged, it's them." "Be that as it may," Fletcher continued, "I need you to come with me, Blackburn. We'll sort this out officially." Wade nodded slowly, resignation in his eyes. "I understand, but I give you my word I haven't stolen anything." "Your word doesn't mean much here, stranger." Fletcher's hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. "Now come along peacefully." Hannah stepped forward. "This isn't right, Deputy. You know the Duttons are troublemakers." Fletcher's gaze softened slightly when he looked at her. "Miss Abbotts, I understand your concern, but I have to investigate their claims. If Mr. Blackburn is innocent as he says, he'll be released promptly." Wade touched Hannah's arm gently. "It's all right. Better to clear this up properly." He turned to Fletcher. "Lead the way, Deputy." As Fletcher escorted Wade out of the store, Hannah felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach. Sheriff Parker was known to be in the pocket of several local ranchers, and justice wasn't always fairly administered in Cottonwood Springs. If the Duttons had friends in high places, Wade could be in serious trouble regardless of his innocence. Throughout the morning, Hannah struggled to focus on her customers. The store was busier than usual, many people coming in just to gossip about the previous evening's excitement. Hannah answered questions vaguely, unwilling to fuel the rumor mill, but she gathered that the town was divided in its opinions. Some viewed Wade with suspicion simply because of his mixed heritage, while others were tired of the Dutton brothers' bullying tactics. By noon, Hannah could stand the waiting no longer. She asked Mrs. Peterson, the seamstress from across the street, to watch the store while she went to check on Wade. The sheriff's office was a small adobe building at the end of Main Street, its weather-beaten sign hanging crookedly above the door. Inside, she found Deputy Fletcher at his desk, but no sign of Wade or Sheriff Parker. "Where is he?" she demanded without preamble. Fletcher looked up from his paperwork, his expression guarded. "The sheriff took him to the holding cell out back." "On what charge?" "Pending investigation," Fletcher replied. "The Duttons brought witnesses who claim they saw him steal tobacco and ammunition from Miller's store." "That's absurd," Hannah said. "Wade had no reason to steal. He has money." Fletcher raised an eyebrow. "You seem mighty sure about a man you just met, Miss Abbotts." Hannah felt her cheeks flush but held her ground. "I know the Duttons, Deputy. They're liars and troublemakers. Maybe so, but we have to follow procedure. Can I see him at least?" Fletcher hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. "But the sheriff won't like it." He led her through the back door to a small yard where a separate structure housed the town's jail cells. Inside, Wade sat on a narrow cot in the single cell, his battered face looking even worse in the dim light. He stood when Hannah entered. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Neither should you," she replied, approaching the bars. "This is absurd. You've done nothing wrong." Wade's expression was grim. "The law doesn't always protect the innocent, Miss Abbotts, especially not men like me." Hannah gripped the iron bars separating them. "I'll talk to Judge Wilson when he comes through next week. He's a fair man." "Next week may be too late," Wade murmured, glancing at Fletcher who stood by the door, pretending not to listen. "The Duttons aren't planning to wait for legal justice." "I overheard Sheriff Parker talking with them earlier." A chill ran down Hannah's spine. "What do you mean?" Wade moved closer to the bars, lowering his voice. "They're planning something for tonight, something that won't leave evidence for a judge to examine." Hannah's eyes widened as his meaning became clear. Lynchings weren't common in Cottonwood Springs, but they weren't unheard of either, especially for outsiders accused of crimes against local citizens. "I won't let that happen," she whispered fiercely. Wade studied her face, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. "This isn't your fight." "I made it mine when I stepped in yesterday," Hannah countered. "I won't stand by and watch an innocent man die." "Time's up, Miss Abbotts," Fletcher called from the door. Hannah reluctantly stepped back from the cell. "Trust me," she said to Wade. "I'll figure something out." As she turned to leave, Wade called after her, "Hannah." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Be careful, these men are dangerous." She nodded once, then followed Fletcher back to the sheriff's office. Her mind was already racing, formulating and discarding plans. She needed allies, people willing to stand against the Duttons and the sheriff. Back at the store, Hannah closed early, hanging a sign that read "Family Emergency" on the door. She hurried through town, stopping first at the home of Dr. Howard Wilkins, the town physician who had been her father's closest friend. "I need your help, Howard," she said when the elderly doctor answered his door. "It's important." Dr. Wilkins listened intently as Hannah explained the situation. When she finished, he shook his head gravely. "It's a dangerous game you're playing, Hannah." Sheriff Parker won't take kindly to interference. I can't sit by and watch an innocent man die, Hannah insisted. Howard, you've known me my whole life. Would I ask this if I wasn't certain? The doctor sighed heavily. No, you wouldn't. You've got your father's moral compass for better or worse. He paused, considering. What exactly do you need from me? Be ready tonight, Hannah said. If something goes wrong, if anyone gets hurt, I understand. Dr. Wilkins nodded solemnly. I'll be ready. Hannah's next stop was the livery stable where Jonas Watson, a freed slave who had settled in Cottonwood Springs after the war, worked as a blacksmith. Jonas had also been her father's friend and had watched out for Hannah since his death. Miss Hannah, Jonas greeted her, setting aside his tools. Heard about your excitement yesterday. Bold move. I need your help tonight, Jonas, Hannah said, explaining her fears about a potential lynching. Jonas's expression darkened. Wouldn't be the first time Parker looked the other way while injustice was done. But interfering could bring trouble down on all of us. I know I'm asking a lot, Hannah acknowledged. But this man is innocent, and even if he weren't, he deserves a proper trial, not frontier justice in the dead of night. Jonas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Your daddy would be proud of you standing up for what's right. Count me in. What's the plan? By dusk, Hannah had gathered a small group of allies: Dr. Wilkins, Jonas, the reverend from the small church at the edge of town, and 2 ranch hands who had their own grievances against the Duttons. They met in the back room of the general store to finalize their strategy. The goal is to prevent violence, Hannah emphasized. We just need to hold off any lynch mob until morning, when more reasonable heads might prevail. Or until they can gather a larger mob, one of the ranch hands muttered. Either way, we buy time, Hannah replied firmly. Jonas, you'll take the first watch near the jail. Reverend, your presence might give some of them pause, so I need you visible in town tonight. The rest of us will be ready to move at the first sign of trouble. As the others left to take up their positions, Dr. Wilkins lingered behind. Hannah, your father would be concerned about you putting yourself in harm's way, he said gently. Hannah smiled sadly. My father taught me that some things are worth the risk. He wouldn't have stood by either. The doctor nodded, squeezing her shoulder. Be careful, child. The night grew dark, a cloudy sky obscuring the stars. Hannah paced her small home behind the store, a Winchester rifle from her father's collection loaded and ready beside the door. Every few minutes, she peered through the curtains toward the sheriff's office down the street, but all remained quiet. Just after midnight, a rapid knocking at her back door made her jump. She grabbed the rifle before cautiously approaching. Who is it? She called. Jonas, came the urgent reply. Hannah quickly unbolted the door. Jonas's face was grim in the lamplight. They're gathering at the saloon, he reported. At least a dozen men, including all 3 Duttons and Sheriff Parker. They've been drinking heavily and talking openly about justice for the Cherokee thief. Hannah's heart raced. How much time do we have? Not long. They're working themselves up to it. Hannah nodded, her resolve hardening. Alert the others. I'll go directly to the jail. Miss Hannah, that's too dangerous. There's no time to argue, she interrupted. Deputy Fletcher might still be there. He's not a bad man, just weak. I might be able to reason with him. Jonas looked unconvinced but didn't argue further. Be careful. I'll gather the others and meet you there as soon as possible. Hannah strapped on her father's gun belt and tucked the revolver into it. The weight felt strange at her hip. She wasn't accustomed to wearing it openly, but tonight called for a show of force. She took the rifle as well and slipped out into the night. The streets were deserted as she made her way toward the jail, keeping to the shadows. From the direction of the saloon, she could hear raucous voices and occasional shouts, growing louder and more belligerent by the minute. She quickened her pace. The sheriff's office was dark when she reached it, the front door locked. Hannah circled around to the back where the cell block stood. To her dismay, she found the door there guarded by a man she recognized as one of the Dutton's ranch hands. Evening, Miss Abbotts, he drawled, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. Bit late for a social call. I need to speak with Deputy Fletcher, Hannah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Ain't here, the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sheriff Parker sent him out to investigate a disturbance at the Peterson farm. Mighty convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Hannah's suspicions were confirmed this was planned, and Fletcher had been deliberately removed from the scene. "Then I'd like to see the prisoner," she said, adjusting her grip on the rifle. The guard's eyes narrowed. "Now why would a respectable lady like yourself want to visit a half-breed thief in the middle of the night?" "That's my business," Hannah replied coldly. "Step aside." The man laughed. "I don't think so, Miss Abbotts. Best you head home now. There's going to be some justice served tonight, and it ain't a sight for a lady's eyes." Hannah raised the rifle, pointing it squarely at the man's chest. "I won't ask again." The guard's smile faded, his expression hardening. "You're making a mistake, girl. Put that gun down before you hurt yourself." "Hannah," a voice called from behind her. She didn't dare turn to look, but she recognized Jonas's deep baritone. "You're not alone." Hannah heard footsteps approaching and sensed others gathering behind her. The guard's eyes darted nervously over her shoulder, assessing the new threat. "This doesn't concern any of you," he said, his hand inching toward his pistol. "Justice concerns everyone in this town," came Reverend Campbell's voice. "We won't stand by and watch a man murdered without trial." The guard hesitated, clearly uncertain about firing on a group that included the town's preacher. Hannah seized the moment of indecision. "The keys," she demanded. "Now." After a tense moment, the guard slowly reached into his pocket and produced a ring of keys. "Sheriff won't forget this," he warned as he handed them over. "Neither will we," Jonas replied, stepping forward to take the man's pistol. "Now sit yourself down right there and don't make a sound." With the guard secured, Hannah unlocked the door to the cell block. Inside, Wade was on his feet, having heard the commotion. His eyes widened at the sight of Hannah with the rifle. "What are you doing?" he asked as she fumbled with the cell keys. "Getting you out of here," she replied, finally finding the right key. The lock clicked open and she swung the cell door wide. "There's a lynch mob forming at the saloon. We don't have much time." Wade stepped out of the cell, his expression grave. "You're risking everything, your reputation, your safety." "Some things matter more," Hannah cut him off. "Now come on." Outside, their small group gathered in the shadows behind the jail. Besides Jonas, Reverend Campbell, and Dr. Wilkins, 2 ranch hands from the Walker spread stood with rifles ready. The bound guard sat propped against the wall, a bandana tied around his mouth. "What now?" Wade asked, looking from face to face. "They'll search the town for me." "I have a wagon waiting at the livery," Jonas said. "We can get you to the territorial border before dawn." Wade shook his head. "Running makes me look guilty." "Staying makes you dead," Hannah countered. Before they could argue further, a commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon. Angry voices and the sound of many boots on the boardwalk signaled that the mob was on the move. "No time to debate," Dr. Wilkins said urgently. "They're coming." "This way," Jonas directed, leading them toward the back of the livery stable where the shadows were deepest. They had barely made it halfway when a shout went up behind them. "There they are! The prisoners escaped." Hannah glanced back to see a group of men spilling into the street, several carrying torches that illuminated their angry faces. At their head stood Rance Dutton with Sheriff Parker close behind him. "Run," she urged Wade, giving him a push forward, but Wade stood his ground. "No more running," he said quietly, turning to face the approaching mob. "I've done nothing wrong." "This isn't the time for a stand on principle," Hannah hissed, tugging at his arm. "They'll kill you." Wade looked down at her, his blue eyes reflecting the distant torch flames. "I can't spend my life running, Hannah. Sooner or later, a man has to face what's coming for him." Before she could respond, the mob was upon them, spreading out to form a loose semicircle. Rance Dutton stepped forward, a rope coiled in his hands. "Well, well," he sneered. "The half-breed's got himself some friends, including our very own Miss Abbotts. How disappointing." Sheriff Parker pushed his way to the front, his face flushed with whiskey and anger. "You're interfering with the law, Hannah. Step aside now and we'll forget your part in this jailbreak." Hannah raised her rifle. "There's no law in what you're doing, Sheriff. This is murder, plain and simple." "It's justice," someone shouted from the crowd. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "If you want justice, give him a fair trial," Reverend Campbell called out. "Let a judge decide his guilt or innocence." "We know he's guilty," the youngest Dutton brother snarled. "What more do you need?" "Evidence would be a start," Dr. Wilkins replied dryly. Or has the concept of proof become outdated in Cottonwood Springs? Sheriff Parker's face darkened. You're all obstructing justice. I'm warning you, step aside or face the consequences. Hannah felt Wade's hand on her shoulder. I appreciate what you're trying to do, he said softly, but I won't have blood shed on my account. There won't be blood if they back down, Hannah replied, not taking her eyes off the mob. Wade moved to stand beside her, his stance protective despite his injuries. Sheriff, he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. I'll submit to your custody if you guarantee me a fair trial before Judge Wilson next week, Parker laughed. You're not in a position to make demands, boy. Seems to me he is, Jonas countered, raising his own rifle. 6 guns against your mob, those aren't bad odds. A tense silence fell over the scene. In the torchlight, Hannah could see uncertainty creeping into some of the mob's faces. They had come for easy violence, not a standoff that might cost lives on both sides. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. All heads turned to see a rider galloping into town, pulling his horse to a skidding stop at the edge of the crowd. It was Deputy Fletcher, his face grim in the torchlight. Sheriff, he called out, dismounting quickly. There's been a development. Parker scowled. What are you doing back so early? I sent you to the Peterson place. There was no disturbance at the Peterson farm, Fletcher replied, pushing through the crowd to face his superior. But on my way back, I caught 2 men breaking into Miller's store, the Dutton's own ranch hands. A murmur ran through the gathered townsfolk. What's your point, deputy? Parker demanded. Fletcher straightened, his voice gaining strength. They confessed, Sheriff, said they've been stealing from Miller for weeks on Rance Dutton's orders, then blaming it on strangers passing through. All eyes turned to Rance, who had gone very still, the rope hanging limp in his hands. That's a damned lie, he spat. My men wouldn't say such a thing. They did when I threatened to take them straight to the territorial marshal instead of you, Fletcher replied. They seem to think you might be lenient with them, the marshal not so much. The mood of the crowd shifted perceptibly. Doubt replaced certainty, and several men at the edges began to back away. Now hold on, Sheriff Parker blustered. This doesn't mean Blackburn is innocent. He could still have stolen. I have a signed receipt, Wade interrupted. For everything I purchased at Miller's store yesterday morning, Mr. Miller himself can confirm it. Parker's face reddened further, but he seemed at a loss for words. The momentum had shifted. I think we've all been hasty, Reverend Campbell said into the awkward silence. Perhaps we should let Deputy Fletcher handle this matter according to proper procedure. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. The Dutton brothers stood their ground the longest, glaring at Wade and Hannah, but eventually even they slunk away toward the saloon. Sheriff Parker followed after them without another word, his authority visibly diminished. When only their small group and Deputy Fletcher remained, Hannah finally lowered her rifle, her arms trembling from the prolonged tension. Thank you, Deputy, she said quietly. Fletcher nodded, his expression troubled. I should have questioned the Dutton's story more thoroughly from the start. I knew something didn't add up. He turned to Wade. Mr. Blackburn, you're free to go. I apologize for your treatment. Wade extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Fletcher shook it. No lasting harm done, Wade said, though I'd appreciate the return of my belongings. I'll fetch them from the office, Fletcher promised. And I'll be having a long conversation with the sheriff tomorrow about his handling of this situation. As Fletcher walked away, Hannah's companions began to drift off as well, each offering quiet words of support before heading home. Soon, only Hannah and Wade remained, standing in the street as the tension of the night slowly ebbed away. That was close, Hannah said, finally allowing herself to acknowledge how frightened she had been. Wade studied her face in the fading torchlight. Why did you do it? Risk everything for someone you barely know? Hannah considered the question. The answer that came to her was simple but profound, because it was the right thing to do, and because I saw something in you worth saving. Wade's expression softened. That first day when you rode up to defend me against the Duttons, that's how I knew. Knew what? Hannah asked. That you'd save me too, he replied softly. Not just from them, but from myself, from running, always running. Hannah felt her heart quicken at his words. What were you running from? Wade sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. My past, my future, the parts of myself I didn't want to face. He paused, seeming to make a decision. I should tell you the whole truth, I owe you that much. They walked slowly toward Hannah's home, the pre-dawn light beginning to soften the eastern horizon. As they went, Wade shared his story in quiet, measured tones. He had been born to a Cherokee mother and a white father, raised in the border territory between worlds. His father had been a cavalry officer who'd resigned his commission to marry Wade's mother against the wishes of both their families. They had carved out a life on a small ranch in Indian Territory until a dispute with neighboring settlers had turned violent. Wade had been 15 when raiders burned their home, killing both his parents. I've been drifting ever since, he concluded as they reached Hannah's porch. Taking work where I could find it, never staying long enough to form attachments. It seemed safer that way. And California? Hannah asked. Is that really where you're headed? Wade leaned against the porch railing, his face thoughtful in the growing light. I thought so. I heard there's land for the taking out west, places where a man's background matters less than his willingness to work. He paused, his eyes finding hers. But now I'm not so sure. Hannah felt a flutter in her chest at his words, but she kept her voice steady. What's changed? I met someone who made me think perhaps running isn't the answer, Wade said simply. Someone brave enough to stand up for a stranger because it was the right thing to do. Hannah looked away, suddenly shy under the intensity of his gaze. You should come inside. Let me check your injuries. They entered the quiet house, the familiar surroundings a stark contrast to the night's danger. Hannah lit a lamp and motioned for Wade to sit at the kitchen table while she gathered her medical supplies. As she cleaned the cuts that had reopened during the confrontation, she was acutely aware of his proximity, of the gentle rise and fall of his chest beneath her fingertips. These will heal, she said softly, but you should still rest. Hannah, Wade caught her hand as she finished bandaging a cut on his forearm. I want you to know something. She stilled, her pulse quickening at the warmth of his touch. What is it? I haven't felt at home anywhere since I lost my parents, he said, his voice low and earnest. But something about this place, about you, it feels right. For the first time in years, I'm not thinking about where to run next. Hannah swallowed hard, emotions she'd long suppressed rising to the surface. You barely know me, she whispered. I know enough, Wade replied. I know you're brave and principled. I know you run this store alone because it was your father's dream. I know you were willing to risk everything to save a stranger because it was right. His blue eyes held her steadily. Some things you just know. The air between them seemed to thicken. Hannah was painfully aware of her disheveled appearance after the night's events, of the rifle still leaning against the wall, of the impropriety of being alone with this man in her home. Yet none of that seemed to matter against the truth of what was unfolding between them. What are you saying, Wade? She asked, needing to hear the words. I'm saying I'd like to stay if you'll have me, he answered simply. Not just in Cottonwood Springs, but here with you. I'm saying that meeting you has changed something in me, Hannah Abbotts. Hannah's heart raced at his declaration. She hardly knew this man, and yet she felt as though she'd been waiting for him without realizing it. The loneliness of the past 3 years, the weight of running the store alone, the emptiness of her carefully ordered existence, all of it seemed to fall away in the face of the connection they shared. It's too soon, she protested weakly. Even as her heart argued otherwise, Wade smiled gently. Maybe, or maybe sometimes life doesn't follow the usual schedule. He released her hand, giving her space. I'm not asking for promises, Hannah, just a chance to stay and see where this leads. Hannah took a deep breath, considering his words. The practical part of her mind raised objections. The town gossips would have a field day, her reputation would suffer. She barely knew this man's character beyond the events of the past 2 days. But her heart, so long neglected, spoke louder. I could use help in the store, she said finally, a small smile touching her lips. If you're looking for work. Wade's face lit up with a grin that transformed his battered features. I'm a quick learner. And there's the spare room, Hannah continued, until we figure things out. I'll be a perfect gentleman, Wade promised, though the warmth in his eyes suggested he hoped their arrangement wouldn't remain so formal indefinitely. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Hannah felt something unfamiliar bloom within her hope, yes, but also possibility. For 3 years, she had existed rather than lived, maintaining her father's legacy without creating one of her own. Now, with this unexpected stranger who was quickly becoming anything but the future suddenly seemed wide open. "We should get some rest," she said, rising from the table. "It's been a long night and the store needs opening in a few hours." Wade nodded, standing as well. "Thank you, Hannah. Not just for saving my life, but for seeing me really seeing me when most people only see the parts they want to." Impulsively, Hannah stepped forward and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Get some sleep, Wade Blackburn. Tomorrow's a new day." As she retreated to her room, Hannah touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of his skin. Whatever came next, she knew with certainty that her life had irrevocably changed the moment she'd decided to defend a stranger on that dusty road, and she wouldn't have it any other way. The weeks that followed unfolded like a dream for Hannah. Wade proved to be an excellent assistant in the store, his easy manner winning over even the most skeptical customers. He had a knack for organization that complemented Hannah's meticulous bookkeeping, and his strength was invaluable when heavy shipments arrived. The town's reaction to Wade's presence was mixed at first. Some, particularly friends of the Dutton brothers, remained suspicious. Others, impressed by his quiet dignity and hard work, gradually accepted him. The revelation that the Duttons had been systematically stealing from local businesses and blaming outsiders had shifted public opinion significantly. Sheriff Parker, facing scrutiny for his handling of the incident, had taken to avoiding the general store entirely. As for the Dutton brothers, they had ridden out of Cottonwood Springs 3 days after the confrontation, reportedly heading for New Mexico territory. No one mourned their departure. Hannah found herself looking forward to each day in a way she hadn't for years. The store, once merely her responsibility, became a place of shared purpose. She and Wade developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs, finishing each other's sentences. They took their meals together, spent evenings on the porch watching the sunset, and gradually learned the contours of each other's lives. She told him about her childhood, about the mother she barely remembered, about her father's dreams for the store and for her. He shared stories of his parents' unconventional love, of hunting with his Cherokee uncles, of the years wandering from town to town taking whatever honest work he could find. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert, their friendship deepened into something more. The first time Wade kissed her after a particularly successful day, when they'd secured an exclusive contract with the new mining operation, Hannah felt as though everything in her life had been leading to this moment. They were married in October, a small ceremony in Reverend Campbell's church with Dr. Wilkins giving the bride away and Jonas standing as Wade's best man. The town turned out in surprising numbers, curiosity mingling with genuine goodwill. Even Deputy Fletcher attended, bringing news that Sheriff Parker had resigned his position following an investigation by the territorial marshal. As husband and wife, they expanded the general store, adding a section for Wade's skillfully crafted leather goods, which quickly gained popularity throughout the territory. With their combined savings, they purchased the vacant lot next door and built a proper home, though they kept the small rooms behind the store for storage. Winter came and went, and with spring's arrival came news that the railroad would indeed be extending a spur line to Cottonwood Springs. The town's future suddenly looked bright, with new businesses opening and families arriving to settle. In April, as wildflowers carpeted the surrounding desert, Hannah shared the news she'd suspected for several weeks they would be welcoming a child by Christmas. Wade's joy was boundless, his protective instincts immediate and endearing. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed one evening as they sat on the porch of their new home, his hand resting gently on Hannah's still flat stomach. "A home, a family, a place where I truly belong." Hannah leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "When did you know," she asked, "that this was where you belonged?" Wade smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I told you once before. That day when you rode in like an avenging angel to defend a stranger, that's how I knew you'd save me too." He kissed her forehead gently. You saved me from a life of running, Hannah. You gave me a reason to stand still. We saved each other, Hannah replied, thinking of the lonely existence she'd led before he arrived. I was just existing before you came along. Now I'm living. Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born in December, a healthy child with her father's striking blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. As Hannah held her newborn, Wade sitting beside them with wonder on his face, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in less than 2 years. Cottonwood Springs grew steadily with the arrival of the railroad, and Abbotts' general store grew with it. By the time Elizabeth was walking, they had hired 2 full-time assistants to help manage the expanding business. When Elizabeth was 3, her brother James joined the family, completing their happiness. Wade proved to be an attentive father, teaching the children both his Cherokee heritage and the practical skills he'd acquired through his years of travel. In the spring of 1883, 7 years after Wade had first ridden into Cottonwood Springs, they received an unexpected visitor. Deputy Fletcher, now Sheriff Fletcher of neighboring Pine County, arrived with news that Rance Dutton had been killed in a saloon fight in Santa Fe. His brothers had reportedly fled to Mexico, leaving behind a trail of debts and enemies. "Thought you should know," Fletcher said as he prepared to leave, "though I suspect it matters little to you now." Hannah glanced at Wade, who stood in the doorway of their home watching Elizabeth and James playing in the yard. "The past has a way of fading when the present is so full," she replied. Fletcher nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You two built something good here, something that matters." He tipped his hat. "Not everyone gets that chance." After he rode away, Hannah joined Wade in the doorway, slipping her arm around his waist. "Are you all right?" she asked, knowing the news about Rance must have stirred memories of that dangerous night. Wade pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than all right," he assured her. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out. If I hadn't interfered that day," Hannah asked. Wade shook his head, his gaze thoughtful as he watched their children. "If you hadn't been the kind of woman who would defend a stranger because it was right. That's rare, Hannah, that kind of courage, that kind of heart." He turned to face her fully, his eyes filled with the love that had only deepened over the years. "I knew then that you'd save me too. And every day since has proven me right." Hannah rose on tiptoes to kiss him, overwhelmed as always by the depth of feeling between them. From that impulsive moment when she'd ridden to defend a stranger, their lives had intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. Through danger and joy, hardship and prosperity, they had built not just a business or a family, but a life worth living together. As twilight descended on Cottonwood Springs, casting long shadows across the bustling town it had become, Hannah Abbotts Blackburn stood with her husband on the porch of the home they had built, watching their children play in the last golden light of day, secure in the knowledge that some risks were always worth taking, especially those of the heart.